Okay. You ready? Let's do this. You're listening to Explore Magazine's Live the Adventure podcast. This is the podcast that delves deep into the outdoors, will inspire, inform, and get you stoked to explore. And I'm your host, David Webb. Hello, explorers, and welcome to episode 11 of Explore Magazine's Live the Adventure podcast. I'm your host, David Webb. What is your relationship to the land? Do you live in a city or the suburbs? Have you ever thought of casting it all off and moving to the country, foraging, growing your own food, hunting, living with a deep relationship to your surroundings, to the land, and to the food you eat? For a lot of us, that's why we hike and camp and paddle. It's to foster that relationship with our wilder self. Today, I'm talking with a woman named Kristeva Dowling. She's the author of a book called Chicken Poop for the Soul, and she's also the subject of a new mini documentary available on YouTube called With the Land. The MiniDoc is a snapshot of her life on a rural property outside of Grande Prairie, Alberta. She's following a calling she's had all her life. She wants to live in relationship with nature. And well, that's a big thing to do because it's a hard life. And it's a life that requires you to get your hands dirtier than you might think. Kristeva hopped on a call with me from her property outside of Grande Prairie. And we talked about a lot of things, from growing your own food, to living off the land, to living in relationship with nature, industrial agriculture, urban density, carbon footprint, veganism, and she's got some opinions. Want to hear them? Stay tuned for my talk with Kristeva Dowling. Hi Kristeva, thank you for joining me today on Explorers Live the Adventure podcast. Can you introduce yourself?
I sure can. My name's Kristeva Dowling. I live just outside Grande Prairie, Alberta, and I'm the author of Chicken Poop for the Soul and mazer and owner-operator at Stolen Harvest Meadery.
So you live in a very rural area. I caught a documentary, a MiniDoc put out recently about living off the land and the things that you're up to right there. Can you tell me a little bit about where you live and why you live there?
It's about 30 minutes outside of Grande Prairie in northern Alberta. And one of the reasons I live there is it is, just as you say, it's fairly remote. And there's a lot of bush and wilderness around, so it's, easy access for foraging and that sort of thing. I like the space. I like being able to go snowshoeing in the winter, and, I'm not really cut out to be in a city 24/7.
Where did you come from before there?
Well, I was born and raised in Vancouver.
Okay.
But I moved up here from another remote village, actually, Bella Coola on the west coast of BC.
Oh, right on. Yeah, beautiful place. And so how long ago did you leave the city then?
Oh my goodness, 20 plus years ago.
And you went from there to Bella Coola. So what was the draw in that making that step?
It's actually more sorted and complicated than that. I didn't go straight to Bella Coola. I taught scuba diving all over the province of British Columbia, sort of 1 week in every town. And so I got to see a lot of rural and remote British Columbia and little western parts of Alberta. And then I actually did a 6-year stint in New Zealand where I did my education. And then I missed the wilderness when I was in New Zealand. While New Zealand's very beautiful and, clean green New Zealand is sort of their tag phrase, I really missed seeing deer through the forest and moose, on the side of the road, and that sort of thrill of seeing a larger predator like a bear or coyote or something like that.
And so that is what you've sought out over the past few years, which took you to northwestern Alberta.
Yes, it did.
Now, most of our listeners are outdoor enthusiasts, outdoor recreationalists who would say they have a pretty strong connection to the outdoors. But I'd like you to tell me a little bit about your relationship to the land, because I was watching the documentary and I was seeing that you're really striving to really be living as a part of the wilderness, is what I took from it, as a part of nature and in harmony with a lot of it. And we can get into a bit more of what that means exactly, because it's also not all sunshine and rainbows either. But can you tell me about your relationship with the land and what that means to you?
You're right. It definitely isn't all sunshine and rainbows, especially this far north. It's a lot of snow and some rainbows. For me, I think it's something that started many years ago when I first started gardening and learning about gardening. And then it wasn't long before I learned about permaculture, which when you're doing permaculture stuff, you're sort of replicating the way nature grows. So it isn't like straight lines in this bare field. You're more creating a food forest. And, we all know that nature abhors a vacuum. So you start designing your gardens like a forest. So it's not, you don't wipe out all the trees in the area. So you have your fruit trees and some bushes and shrubs planted. And you're trying to replicate that way that nature grows. And then, of course, you come up to, I came to a place like this, and the growing season is so very short that it's more difficult. And I started realizing that, boy, this is really hard to try and hack out a garden out of the, forest and then try and grow stuff in this super short season. So you're very limited to what you can grow. Like off the table are any of the things that I really love, like eggplants, peppers, any of the Mediterranean vegetables. Corn even doesn't make it up here. So it wasn't long before I started noticing, I'm off in the bush and I'm walking my dog through the bush or in the wintertime and stuff. And you start noticing things that are growing. Like there's a whole real abundant ecosystem out there, even in this short northern prairie climate. Berries are abundant here. So I started thinking, why am I working so hard at hacking out this garden and sort of fighting with nature? Why not actually just, I call it kind of chasing the seasons, learn what's out there and make note of what's available and when, and start hunting and looking for that.
Now, before you moved up there, were you aware of all this, or did you go up there with a different idea that you were going to sort of, grow the garden as you saw fit and just forge your own way as you saw fit, or were you more aware of the what you were going to come up against climatically and geographically and in terms of the environment up there?
A bit of both. I knew that there were berries in the forest. You sort of, I think every Canadian kind of knows that, whether or not they know it to be able to identify all the things and know when the seasons are and that sort of thing. I certainly didn't. But theoretically, I knew, and I knew enough about First Nations people and the history of the country, and that obviously people survived here long before so-called civilization came. But I certainly didn't know the extent or, how to find those sorts of things. I think this is the most humbling place I've ever lived in terms of trying to grow a garden. The season is short. It's not super hot. Yes, the days are very long in the summer, but they're not full of heat. It's very rare if you get above kind of 22 degrees here.
So you must have had to adapt your diet and the things that you had expected your entire life if you want to live this way and live in this area that you just have limited options or sort of less conventional options. Was that a tough transition, or did you find that easier?
I guess I actually found it really, really exciting because I'm discovering things that I never knew existed, and actually really finding joy in some of those things. Some of the things that are just out there in our forest are really quite delicious. Of course, some of the things need help, like, you need to have your garlic to go with your dandelion greens kind of thing. But like, cattail pollen in pancakes, that trumps vanilla any day.
Yeah, I saw you using that in the documentary. That was neat.
Oh, it's so good. And so I would encourage anybody who knows how to identify that and likes being out in the bush or likes hiking, bring that into your life. Bring some of the trail snacks into your life, teach your kids that kind of thing. Instead of just going out to hike for the sake of hiking, add some of these, the plant identification and berry identification and that kind of stuff into your life, because you get to eat things that you wouldn't otherwise ever have access to.
Yeah, I know the mushrooming crowd is big into that. They go hiking and just sort of add that element to it where you're sort of on this scavenger hunt for mushrooms.
Yes, which for me makes the hiking all that more enjoyable.
For sure. Yeah, I would agree. It's fun to have a goal when you're out there and something that you're sort of engaging your mind with. I like to wander as well, but it is fun to be on the hunt for something as well.
Well, and another piece that with that I didn't sort of anticipate happening, but there's something about it that really resonates right down to our DNA in that it really takes us back to being sort of the essence of what it means to be humans, because really we are animals of the forest. We're an apex predator, but we also really aren't born, we aren't naturally meant to be in concrete jungles. So when you're out there harvesting and foraging, you're suddenly in touch with something that humanity has done for thousands and thousands of years.
Yeah, yeah. And so you feel that when you're up there, because in the documentary, you said something about it was a calling to you to live this way. Can you tell me what that meant, and when did you hear it?
The first little call happened when I was about 5. My dad had a workmate that lived on a farm just outside Vancouver in the Langley area, I think. And I didn't know it at the time, but my dad and I have spoken about it since, because he's kind of asked, like, goodness sakes, why are you doing this? So I have to tell him, well, Dad, you actually started this in a way. And we went out to this farm for a barbecue, and it was the first time that I'd ever seen a cow. And it was the first time I'd ever seen a big red barn with a hay loft, and something just struck me then. As a little 5-year-old girl, I thought, oh, I'm sure I pestered my dad all the way home. Daddy, please, can we have a farm? So that was really, it kind of stuck with me. And of course, my parents weren't about to entertain a 5-year-old child's dream and move themselves out of the city. Mm-hmm. So I kind of had to wait till I got old enough to be able to do that myself.
Yeah, it's interesting. So it was something that you harbored, though, for a long time. This sort of, it must have just was under the surface all the time that you wanted to live this way until you finally got the opportunity. It was, so I see what you mean when you feel that it was a calling, because it had been with you for your entire life.
It really was, yeah.
Take me back to when you first got up to where you are now. I live in the city. I'm from a rural area, but I do live in the city, and certainly I'm constantly thinking about moving to areas like that, rural areas, and just kind of doing what you're doing. And I know I romanticize it, for sure. So I wanted to talk about your emotions when you got up there and you finally realized you'd taken that leap. What did you feel? I mean, was it scary? Did you have regret? I mean, what were your emotions when you finally arrived there and thought, okay, I'm going to actually do this. I'm going to live in this area. I'm going to forage as much as I can. I'm going to try and live in harmony. It looks like you're relatively isolated up there. Tell me about that. Walk me through that.
I don't think I ever had any regrets. If I ever had regrets, the only thing would be that I'm a long way away from my family.
Right.
So that part is really, at times, really not easy. Mm-hmm. Other than that, the lifestyle up here is fantastic. Until this, actually just a couple months ago, I had a horse, and going out on the horse was really great. Mm-hmm. And there's not a lot of places that's still, able to be done, and able to be done relatively easily, and really right outside my back door. So the whole it's really hard to explain, David, in that it's kind of an overall encompassing lifestyle thing. That isn't just about, okay, I'm going to move here because it's good foraging. It's, it's kind of a constellation of things that came together. It was a place I could get a toehold where I knew one person that I'd known for 20 years. It was a place that, I very carefully, in the sense of, went south of Grand Prairie, because that's where there's more wilderness and less farms. So yes, I sort of thought very carefully in some ways about where I was going to be and what the area had to offer and how that was going to fit into my lifestyle.
So it seems like a few things intersected to guide you to where you are.
Absolutely.
So tell me about a day for you up there, because I know for a lot of us, a day is, it's very different right now with the COVID-19 pandemic, but generally speaking, it's, getting up, getting yourself together, going to work, coming home, eating groceries that you bought at the store. So from the MiniDoc that I saw online, your day is very different than that. So I was wondering if you could walk us through just quickly what sun up to sundown looks like for you.
It's funny you should say that, because just last Monday, my sister called and she asked me what I was doing, and I told her, and I said, what are you doing? And she says, wow, our Mondays are very different. Yeah. She's a mental health nurse in the Lower Mainland. And so this last week and a half has been big time dandelion harvest time and spruce tip harvest time.
Okay.
So I've been out in the bush doing both, the bush more for the spruce tips, and then all around my own acreage for the dandelions. And so, yeah, it's sort of a harvest like mad, then come home, wash, rinse, dry, and then make use of those items. So the spruce tips primarily go into salt. I make spruce tip salt, which is, if you've never tried it, I encourage you to try it. It's fantastic on a whole bunch of things. I'm doing my mead making, obviously commercially now. So then there's taking care of the meads, which amount to, really, it's like having a little microscopic farm of little yeasty critters that I kind of tend to. So you literally kind of have to feed them, and not so much water them, but feed them and then give them air.
And the mead making is a business for you now. April
3rd, I got my license to be able to do it commercially.
Oh, congratulations.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah.
So that went from an incredible hobby that captured my imagination for quite some time to such a love that I decided to try and do it commercially.
In the documentary, you mentioned about this idea that you're circumventing a system in a way that, there's a lot of pressure out there to go to work, get a job, get money, and then buy food. And do you look at yourself as sort of circumventing that a little bit by growing it all and trying to get as much off the land? While at the same time, if you have a commercial meadery, you do participate in that as well. So I just wondered if you had any thoughts on what your goals are there. Did you think that maybe you could get out of that system entirely, or do you sort of accept it as something that you live in and are now participating in?
Well, sadly, nowadays you really can't just get right out. We have to pay taxes. Mm-hmm. So you need to make some sort of income. Right. And then if you're gonna, if you're gonna have a vehicle, then you need insurance, and you need gas, and you need oil, and so the whole idea of homesteading per se, as it was done historically, really isn't accessible to us anymore. I think I had fantasies of that when I was younger, and if I was sort of still 25 now, I might think about being even more remote. But I mean, you're not, and so you do. I do need to have access to money. And that's part of the planning process. Like, okay, so how far are you willing to go out? How far are you willing to drive? And how often do you need to come to town? All of those things you have to factor in and balance. And so in some ways, yes, I'm circumventing it. If I'm going out and harvesting a bunch of berries, it means I'm not going to the grocery store to buy my berries. And I enjoy that. And it's not that I'm enjoying it because of the circumventive aspect. I'm enjoying it because of all the other pieces of what comes with going out into the bush and harvesting things. Listening to the birds, seeing, you find elk wallows where they've come down and rolled in the mud and had fun. You see things that moose or deer or whatever are eating, what trees bears are scratching on, noticing game trails, all of these other pieces of being out in the bush. Yes, I'm out there to find blueberries, but there's a whole story that I'm also kind of reading in the landscape while I'm out there. And it's a piece of it that I did not anticipate.
So then would it be fair to say when you had the plan, the idea to go out and say berry picking, you were thinking of the logistics of it. I'm going to go out and I'm going to get berries. I'm going to bring them home. I'm going to make juice or sauce or just eat them or whatever. And then when you got out there, that's when you found the mindfulness of it all, because you were so immersed in it that there was this new facet of it, this new element that enhanced the entire experience.
Yes. And that really first gelled for me on my first moose hunting experience. I went with a man named Clarence Hall, who's now passed away. But he and his sons taught me to hunt. And that was when that really hit, because we were out together and he would be showing me all of the other tracks in the snow and helping teach me how to identify grouse tracks or mole tracks or what have you, whatever else was out there. Coyote, wolves was a big one, cougars, obviously. And then we'd see that where they'd bedded down in the snow, and then he'd show me the branches that they'd eaten. And that's when that whole little, wow, there's a whole story on this landscape and learn a whole other set of learning. And again, so now when I'm out in the bush in the winter, it's not just dead quiet and pretty white snow. I'm actually looking at tracks, and you're looking for this whole story. Who else is out there with you? And it becomes sort of a more three-dimensional way of being in the world, I guess, is the way I would describe it.
I think we're on the same wavelength here, because the next thing I wanted to ask you about on that vein is your relationship to hunting. In the documentary I was watching, there is that part about the bear, the bear that was going after your hives, and you thought, and then you had to shoot him. You made the decision to shoot him, I'll say. The idea to protect the hives and to also then use the bear afterwards. Before you moved up there, did you have this more utopian ideal of just like the harmony would always be positive, or did you think about the idea that like if you want to participate in the wilderness and in the wild, then a part of that is, or could possibly be, and likely will be, the idea of hunting and killing to eat? And what is your relationship to that?
My big first learning with that was when I first went to Bella Coola before I came here. So I was very well prepped by the time I came here. Sort of the rose-colored glasses were off. They shattered in Bella Coola, really, because there's, that people down there joke that there's sort of more grizzly bears and bears in the forest than there are people there. And whether or not that's actually true, it's certainly sometimes how it feels. So, and when I first moved there, you'd hear guns go off at night, and in my naive city background, I sort of, when a gun would go off, I'd think, oh, for goodness sakes, can't you just live in harmony with them? And that whole transition to realizing that, no, actually you can't. And then there was a big transition to learning why we can't and what that really looks like. And part of the reason we can't is because, just like any animal, when you're training your dog, if you don't want it up on the couch, you have to teach it to be not on the couch. It doesn't just not go on the couch because you hope it won't go on the couch. So humans have had for millennia this relationship with those apex predators, and we have pushed them back. And those animals have learned to stay out of our way because they know that we're an apex predator. They know they've been speared or shot at or trapped or deadfalled, all of the historic ways that humans have worked with and or against those animals to either harvest from the wild so that humans survive. The animals have learned that. So that helped make them more nocturnal. You hear a lot of people now saying, oh, coyotes used to be so nocturnal. Well, they're not so nocturnal anymore because we're not out there hunting as much as we used to.
So they get
and
bolder.
We're all living in cities. They get bolder. Just like your dog, if you turn your back, it's going to sneak up onto the couch maybe when you're not home, or when it thinks it can get away with it. So animals live that same way. And you notice, like, in a place where bears and the pressure isn't being hunted, they get bolder. So they're coming closer to people's homes and so forth. And we're not shooting back. So they realize that, oh, I'm not being quote unquote disciplined. Like I know a lot of city folk will be probably horrified by this idea, but it's a reality. Humans push back, and then the animals learn their boundaries. So that was a big, long learning curve. And I mean, when you are suddenly, I kept chickens and I kept goats and I kept turkeys and ducks. And there's nothing more horrifying, let me tell you, than having a wild animal come in and be killing something right in front that you've loved and birthed and raised and fed every day, and it sat on your lap, and then seeing it be eaten right before your very eyes by a cougar or a wolf or a fox or whatever.
Going back to the bees, when on the documentary, it was the sense of responsibility that you have as well, that when something is encroaching on animals that you've made a pledge to care for, then you have a responsibility to act, even if it means the animal that's encroaching must die, is what you're essentially saying, right?
Yes. Yeah. And there's part of it, you feel a responsibility. The other part of it is either the bear gets all my honey or I do. And, again, a lot of people go, oh, well, you could buy honey from the grocery store. Okay, but that's not the way I want to live.
And what about reconciling the fact that there is also that idea of the, who encroached on who in terms of you living there versus the bear living there? Do you ever think about that, the idea that the bear is coming into maybe historically where bears were free to roam, and now they're not free to roam there anymore? So does that ever play into your decision making as well?
Oh, absolutely. And I really think that that's a responsibility on a way bigger level than me personally that needs to be changed. You know, we as humans are very arrogant. We don't leave them space. Our cities are growing all the time. 20 years ago when I came into Grand Prairie, it was all a farmer's field, like field after field of farmlands and all of that until basically the downtown core. Now you come into Grand Prairie and for miles we've developed out and out. Like the footprint of Grand Prairie is something like the size of Los Angeles.
Wow.
Yet here there's 70,000 people living versus Los Angeles 15 million. So there's an arrogance here of that we humans have, that if we really want to preserve some nature spots, then we need to stop going. We need to stop growing. We need to stop just going wherever we want to willy-nilly. So should we be hiking way off into the back and beyond? Well, maybe not. Maybe we need to actually limit our growth from cities. We need to limit our populations, and we need to limit where we go if we want to maintain wilderness and nature and those things. And do we need to be going everywhere we want to? Maybe we shouldn't.
There is sometimes this idea that that cities, the problems start with cities, with like, you know, hyper populations and growth and stuff like that. But sometimes I think maybe you could make a strong case to densifying cities and then leaving other spaces wild, rather than some of the sprawl you're talking about that, like you said, I mean, if Grand Prairie is full of 70,000 people and Los Angeles is full of 10, 15 million, whatever it is, in the same amount of space, what is the bigger footprint?
Absolutely. Maybe we need to densify the cities. Maybe we also need to, you know, actually start controlling our population. Maybe we also need to control our where the food is grown. Like, do we really need pineapple in January as Canadians? Or could we maybe be preserving a bit more of our own food? Maybe we could have farms around our smaller towns. And I don't mean like these vast acres of wheat or canola. I mean mixed farms. Like the food shouldn't have to travel 15,000 miles so that I can eat. Obviously, in winter in Northern Canada, some of it's going to have to travel. But in general, you look at the way some of the European cities are created, and they're little small mixed farms outside the towns. So the food doesn't necessarily have to travel as far.
I think in the 20th century, we got really spoiled with that. You know, I mean, asking people to give up bananas for a certain time of year, or to give up this is such a big ask, because we're just so used to the abundance all the time that. And the funny thing is, I do find when you do buy things out of season, it's usually bad anyway, even if it has traveled from somewhere else. You know, you're usually terribly disappointed by it regardless. So, you know, you go and buy strawberries in January and they taste like flavorless pulp anyway, and they traveled all the way from Mexico to get there. And it does give you pause for thought about what we're really doing here, and whether or not we need to just have everything all the time, always, even when it's unsatisfactory.
Well, and that's the thing. So we have these things all the time, and then we kind of, like you say, we're becoming spoiled because we can have these things all the time. But then what's special, right? Is anything special when you can get strawberries and pineapples in January? And, you know, like I guess that's when we were younger. Oh, think about how exciting Christmas was. Like, oh my goodness, you know, Christmas is coming. And now I really feel that those sorts of desires rekindled in me. Like, I wait all winter. I can't wait for spruce tip season. I can't wait for dandelions. That it suddenly there's those parts are brought back into my life. That anticipation, that excitement, that longing for something that nowhere else has.
And living in northwestern Alberta, that would be a very amplified sense of that too. I mean, I live in southwestern BC in Vancouver, so our seasons are quite gentle here, whereas you are seeing dramatic changes, you know, ice overs, deep snow, green explosions, dramatic falls. So I'm sure that feeling would be amplified where you've chosen to live as well.
Yeah, it absolutely is. There's definitely 4 different outfits up here.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Circling back a bit to outdoor recreation, I know in terms of hiking and camping and things like that, that was really born a lot in popular culture in the 20th century as we disconnected from the land and felt a need to reconnect in our recreation time. do you recreate outdoors, or is every day kind of just this connection? Like, do you find yourself having any need whatsoever to explore and wander and camp, or is it just kind of like this ongoing lifestyle that you have that you never feel that need because you're so in it all the time?
Yeah, it's funny you should say it that way. So I don't have an ongoing need because, yes, I'm pretty much immersed in it. In a lot of ways, I feel like I'm camping all the time. But that's not to say that I don't need an escape from the day to day.
Right.
So I kind of, I would like to go and just hang out in a hammock and read a book, right? That's kind of my escape because my day to day is chasing the seasons and chasing the wilderness, what's happening, what's in season, what's coming next, and then putting it into a mead or pickling it or jelly in it or dehydrating and making salts and, sort of food prepping all the time. So my escape, whereas I think, before I was doing all this, it was exciting to go camping and, find a blueberry patch and then, pick for a couple hours and put them in your pancakes. And that used to be super exciting. And not that it isn't exciting anymore, because I still love that. But now I would like a break from it.
And do you find that easy to do, though? Because you'd be surrounded by it. So, I mean, say, like, for some of us might want to go berry picking for recreation. That is a part of your life every day. But if you decided to go for a hike or a walk and say, I'm not going to pick berries right now because I just want to go and wander, I mean, how do you
Oh, no, I can't not.
I was going to say, how do you disconnect from that? Yeah.
No, I can't not.
Yeah.
That's what I mean. It's like I need to put blinders on and be in a hammock and a book in front of me.
Yeah. Fair enough.
Sort of need it forced on me to not do that.
Do you make trips into Edmonton or something like that to get to go to the city? Do you ever feel like you need a break from the country, or are you just totally okay all the time there?
No, I actually, that's one of the things I do a couple of times a year, of course, until this COVID hit. But yeah, I would go into Edmonton and meet friends, and we have foodie weekend.
Oh, that's fun. Yeah.
Super fun. Go out for really good food. We'd be basically hunting and pecking through the city for things like love Silk Road spices. Beautiful store. The Italian Center, finding little spice stores or foodie stores. And that's kind of we always went to the farmer's market, those sorts of things. So it was sort of a citified version of hunting and gathering, really.
You must take that stuff back. Say you're finding different spices from different cultures and then blending it with what you're growing on the land there and what you're harvesting for probably some pretty interesting creations, I'd say.
Definitely. Oh yeah, there's a whole bunch of fusion food going on here. I like it, so it's like Middle East meets Canada kind of thing.
Yeah, for sure. That's cool.
And really native Canada, because Canada, I mean, we bring lots of food in, and you go to grocery store and it's really not only Canadian food there. Obviously, we've already talked about it coming from thousands of miles away and around the world and so forth. But that's actually another aspect of this whole lifestyle, David, that's really settling in for me, is learning the flavors of Canada. And right now, obviously, particularly Alberta. So things that are growing literally within 100 feet of my front door. And there's some really delectable things out there.
Do you take inspiration from the traditional peoples of the land? Have you learned from them? Have you researched? Have you drawn? Have you educated yourself about some of the techniques and some of the historical and present ways that some of the local Indigenous people might be living on the land to adopt into your own life and your own lifestyle?
Yes, definitely. Oh, so that's probably the little known part of my life, is I actually have a master's degree in social anthropology. So yes, I have studied not only in, the indigenous cultures here in North America, but the world over, really, not every part of the world, but certainly many parts. And yes, it's been something that's also been something that I think has been in my blood since a very young age. As a child, of course, the only influence you have is sort of fairy tales and TV. But I think I had a very romanticized notion of living with First Nations. And yes, you learn from the First Nations here, and I learn from what's actually growing. And then you really bring that into your life. And then I guess that's something that it really is cross-cultural, and it really has no culture, because we humans, again, we are actually an animal of the forest, or should have been. That's where we originate from, or the savannah, or the whatever, right? Somewhere on this earth, we were born to nature, not to a city, not to a hospital, not to a little tiny, single family unit. We're born on this earth and roam this earth and learn to live with the earth and the seasons and the abundance that it provided. And we hunted and we gathered. And, it's really only been not that long, actually, that agriculture and becoming stuck in one place has been a human thing.
It's interesting that you chose that as a field of study for yourself too, because that does speak to the calling that you spoke of earlier. That as a kid, just sort of like feeling something connect with it, and then going on to actually study the inner workings of how people live around the world, and then using that now in your practice. Like you've taken that education, and now you're practicing it. So I find that quite fascinating.
Yeah, I literally am practicing it and enjoying it. It's not just a 9 to 5. I go to work and I teach at a university anthropology, and then I come home and I forget it. It's it's quite the opposite, really. I'm not, quote unquote, making a living from my education the way that other people may or would have or whatever, but I'm making use of it.
So I want to talk about the documentary, the MiniDoc that Telus had a hand in. How did that come about?
One of the Telus, I guess she's a producer, got in touch with me and asked if I would be interested in participating. And I gather she'd read my book or heard me on CBC radio or something. I can't remember. I can't honestly remember exactly how they found me. But of course, yes, I was interested in participating. And then so the film crew, I was introduced to the film, the director, Dominique Keller, and then, arranged for a time. She sort of told me what she was wanting to get out of it. They wanted to see a winter scene and then come in the spring as well. And so that's what we did. And then when she came, she brought the cinematographer with her, and both lovely people. Lovely, lovely people. So much fun to work with. And then of course it was nice that they came twice. So the introduction was in the winter time, and then they came back in the spring, early summer. And, by that time they already felt like family. They sort of stayed here for 3 or 4 days, I think, at each time. And we ate together, and
it's beautifully shot.
It's really beautifully shot. Really beautifully shot. Well, Dominique really had, she had it sort of mind mapped out how she wanted the whole thing to, come together. And Patrick, I think, is just a beautiful, he really has an eye for his craft, and she obviously has a mind for mentally mapping it out beforehand. And, just really, really neat people, really, really neat experience to work with them.
And were you involved in the production of it, or were you just the subject and then you saw their final product, or did they involve you in producing it?
Oh, goodness, no. Yeah. I wasn't part of the production whatsoever. Only my only piece was, we sort of, I guess, brainstormed beforehand. Like she, of course, she doesn't live this lifestyle. So she was like, okay, we can come in February or March. What's going on then? So then, this is going on and that's going on, and these are the things I'm harvesting, or this is what I'm having to do. So of course, taking care of the bees and those sorts of things. So that gave her a picture of how sort of what she could put together.
How do you feel about it? How does it look when you saw the final product? What did you think?
Oh, it's beautiful. It's really a beautifully shot, beautiful trajectory.
And what do you hope people take from it?
That's really hard thing to do. It's like, I guess in a way, because it is my life, it's very hard to know how somebody that's not a part of it would see it, or what they might. I mean, maybe that's more a question for you. What did you take from it as someone who doesn't live this?
That's a great question. It's something I've thought about, that returning to that lifestyle. I mean, I grew up in a semi-rural area on Vancouver Island. It's not super remote. Like, a lot of the island is very connected to other towns. But we lived in a rural area, and I have thought about returning to that life from the city, taking my family there. And I watched that, and I did feel that it didn't overly romanticize it at all. And what I took from it was just thinking about how even if I don't make that choice to go and move to the country somewhere, how I can make little choices maybe to live more in harmony with the land every day. It made me think about that kind of stuff. Yeah.
And I'd like you to change the language a bit instead of in harmony with, because really there is no in harmony with. It's in relationship to.
Fair enough. Yeah. Yeah.
Because nature isn't harmonious. Nature, it's a brutal fight about who's going to get access and space, and right down to mosquitoes and sort of a molecular level, right? It really is sort of the survival of the fittest and who gets the space. And there's nothing harmonious about trying to have your dinner out and you're being attacked by thousands of mosquitoes.
And that comes up a lot, in Explore magazine, in the current issue that just came out. There's a story about a bear attack, and I had some discussion with the writers and the illustrators and stuff, and there is some opinion on some people's minds that like the bear did something wrong, and it was this idea that like, no, the bear is just a bear, it was just there, and it just did what it did. And I do think that there is this idea sometimes that the harmony is interrupted by the natural flow of nature, and it is important to remember sometimes that it's like, no, the harmony is in your mind. Like I even said just a second ago, live in harmony with nature, and you're like, no, that's just something you've created, this harmony.
It's a lovely human fantasy. It really is. It's a lovely human fantasy that we can live in harmony. Nature is not harmonious. And yeah, you're right that the bear's just being a bear. Like, I don't know how that encounter happened or what, I know nothing about it. But I mean, there's the bear meandering through the forest in, his little pattern of life. That's another thing you learn out here is just how habitual most animals are. They're just like us. The game trails get made because they walk that same trail on their way to, they've scoped out the land exactly how I have. They know where the berries are. They know what time of year they're going to come there. They know where their watering hole is. They know where their favorite back scratching tree is. And so you go out in there and you see their trails and their watering holes. And they are very habitual. It's really quite something to realize that. So, and then all of a sudden here comes the bear and there's now a human on its trail. Maybe it's, fear. Sometimes we don't know how we as humans react as fear. Some people, punch first and run, and other people just run. Well, bear, animal, no different. You don't know how that thing's going to react. Is it going to punch first and then run, or is it going to, just run away? And that was sort of the story about that we covered. It was just, there was no answer whatsoever. The bear just did what it did. It just did it, and then it just left. It just reacted. There was no, and I think sometimes we do look for meaning, and there just wasn't any. Far too much so. Far too much so, and that the sort of blame or the kind of rationalizing it away. Oh, well, it was a younger one. It was weak. It was hungry. Or the people who are baffled by, oh, it wasn't weak and it wasn't underweight and it was, we don't know why it did it. Well, how about we just accept, animals are really not that different from us. And just think about how you react personally to something that shocks you or something that surprises you. We're really, I don't believe we're really all that different from animals. We are an animal. We have instincts. We have reactions. So do they. And maybe it'd be helpful for all of us to sort of accept that a little bit more about ourselves and have a better relationship with everything if we just kind of realize that. I want to talk about your book for a second too, Chicken Poop for the Soul. I wonder if you could tell me a little bit about that. Well, that really started after I'd read The 100 Mile Diet. Right. I don't know if you're familiar with that. Absolutely. Yeah. He used to write for Explore magazine. Okay. Yeah. Well, when I read, I loved their story. I loved their idea. I love that they really, to me, they really put that local food idea back on the map. But after I'd read it, I kind of thought, really all they did was shop. What if I could actually do it? Like, what if I could actually grow all my own food and learn how to harvest and learn how to hunt and all of that stuff and literally have like a 25-foot diet apart from the hunting, right? And then learn, of course, along with that, you're learning how to preserve things. You're learning how to can, dehydrate, all of those things, process food. And then, of course, killing my own animals. And a big part of, like, I'd done the whole trajectory from being raised a meat eater to going vegetarian for the, philosophically, oh, I don't want to hurt the animals. And then realizing that if you're wanting to do it about the ethics and animals, you can't stay in dairy land very long because the dairy industry is pretty atrocious. And so then I went to vegan and then back again, really, because I worked through in my mind all of the philosophical reasons why. And then once you're in veganism, it can be a very holier than thou type of little realm of the world. But when you're, once you start realizing that actually in order to support humans with soybeans, you got to actually make vast tracts of fields. So you're going to have to cut down vast tracts of forest, and those things don't grow in northern Canada. So you're going to have to transport stuff. And then if you want it to look like tofurkey, then it's going to have to be manufactured. You need industry, you need oil miles, you need all of these things. So, to get that little piece of tofu to us over here, imagine the oil miles, the industry, all of that stuff. I thought, whoa, you know what? That's actually not better. Yes, I'm maybe making myself feel better that I'm not killing an animal, but you are indirectly by, the deer that are laying in the fields that as the combine comes by, they get killed. The little baby who knows, its mother leaves, it lays in the field to stay. That's its defense. So and never mind right down to insects, right? Thousands and thousands and thousands. So it's not like you're not killing things if you're vegan. You are, you're just pretending you're not. So I kind of went through that and got all of that, education and knowledge and so forth. And then I really, then I came onto that 100-mile diet and thought, wow, okay, that really is probably the best thing we can do for the planet, for the environment, for the animals, as close to home as possible. Less food miles, all of that stuff. So I kind of had to go back to the idea of eating meat, which wasn't easy. And then, I thought, I'll give these animals a better life. They won't be in a little cage. They won't be being, subjected to all these horrible things that industrial ag does. And do it myself. And the trajectory was massive. Like the learning curve was massive. And again, I sort of enlisted the old timers from the valley. A lot of the people in that valley are still canning. The older folks are still canning and preserving, and there's hunters and so forth. And so I really asked around and took knowledge from a lot of people and, got them to teach me things like the hunting and the fishing, but right down to, slaughtering my own turkeys and chickens and so forth. And I'll tell you what, that's not easy. That's really not easy to do. That I nearly had a crisis of consciousness once. I literally hatched those chickens with an incubator and played with those baby chicks. And, and then all of a sudden, 2 years later, you're actually putting them in your freezer.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate what you're saying. I mean, I think we do get so disconnected from our food that it is easy to make sometimes these privileged choices that you can be like, oh, I just, I feel really good about this because, the packaging had really nice earthy logoing on it or something like that, with realizing that, like, if you really want to live sustainably, it requires you to get a little dirtier than you might be comfortable getting.
Yes.
And I know that it has come up recently. I've seen that before with this transition of people that go from like conventional, North American omnivore to vegetarian to vegan, and then the further they go into that, they end up doing this, like you did, this huge circle back and realizing, no, that I actually went in the wrong direction because I started giving less thought to my overall global impact and just sort of doing it to make myself feel better. If you want to talk about the most sustainable living you can, it's just living off the land, fishing and hunting and foraging, and it might not be that politically correct for a lot of people, but it is what it is.
But that politically correct is a theory. Just like the veganism, it's like there's a theory. Yes, okay, you think you're not killing animals, but you actually, if you as a vegan think you're not killing animals, then you're not educated enough about how that works. It's that simple. Because you still
count,
are,
right?
even though you don't
bugs
think
count.
Bugs count, deer count, gophers count, mice count, badgers count. All of those things are still being killed in those great big vast swaths of wheat or soybeans or whatever. If you care at all about animals, for the love of goodness, get educated about how our industrial agriculture animals have their abysmal little lives every single day, thousands and thousands and thousands of them suffer grossly so that we can eat every day.
Is that maybe part of what you would like? I know you said it's up to the individual to take what you want from your book or your documentary, but is that thoughtfulness something that you would hope someone would take then?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the thoughtfulness and I know that for some people it would be overwhelming, right? They're living in a condo downtown. Okay, well, you're obviously not going to necessarily start growing, a ton of food, but you could learn how to make sauerkraut. You could learn how to, you could grow a little herb garden. You could go and buy tomatoes in season and sun dry them in your kitchen windowsill. Everybody could learn to can. You could make cheese. So or go hunt, like the hiking and stuff on the weekends. Join a club that learns how to go berry picking, or like you say, the mushrooms are a big thing in the Lower Mainland. There's fantastic mushrooms in BC. So just do little bits. Every little bit counts. Every little bit helps. And it's really self-satisfying to have someone over for dinner, and at the end of the day you say, hey, David, look at this. These 3 things I grew myself, or these 3 things I've harvested from the wild, and now they're on our dinner table.
I can hear the birds chirping in behind you, and it's wonderful backdrop to what you're saying.
Oh, good. It's funny because I befriended an ornithologist, and one morning I was laying in bed, and he's like, send me a couple of tapes of the birds around your yard. And anyway, I sent him a couple, and he says, wow, you get all those around your yard? I said, you know what, dude, I haven't even left bed yet.
Yeah, that's great. So that's your reward for sure for all your hard work, I'd say. So thanks a lot for joining me today. Is there a place someone could find out more about what you're doing?
There's a couple places. Stolenharvest.com is my webpage for my meadery. But it also has, I've started teaching some foraging classes, and I put up recipes on that blog. And so if anybody who's interested in learning, what we're doing around here, that's a place to go. I also have Chicken Food for the Soul on Facebook profile where I put some things up. And I've had people reach out and ask, once they've read my book and stuff, that, I need to know this and I'd like to know that. And, you can always find me through Facebook if anyone has questions and whatnot.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate the time. That was a great talk. Thanks a lot.
Good. Glad you enjoyed it. Thanks for being in touch.
So, you still want to do it? You want to cast off the urban shackles and move to the country? Flavor your food with cattail pollen? Hunt? Follow the seasons, forage, or if you romanticized it, like a lot of us do. Well, it's given me a lot to think about my relationship to the food I eat, to the land on which I live, and the lifestyle I strive for. I think for now, I'm going to stay put and just enjoy hiking, camping, paddling, and boating. But I think I can take bits from Kristeva's life, apply them to my own. I hope you can too, even if I don't necessarily fall on the same page as her all the time. Thanks for joining me today. I'm David Webb, and hey, live the adventure.